Alright, so now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of 3D. Once we've created our 3D objects, it's time to dress them up with things like textures and surface properties like reflections and lighting and shadows and things like that. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because you really kind of got to have your 3D together and where you're going to have it, because now you're going to start and get in a realm where it starts to get pretty taxing on your processor. So you really got to be careful here and make sure you save often. True, we have the autosave feature here in Photoshop, which is a huge help. It's actually saved me on more occasions than I care to admit. But in addition to consciously remembering to save often, is going to be a big help for you, so you're not having to go back and restart projects all over again. But the way I wanted to do this is really kind of break down something I've already created, just to give you a good idea of how surface properties work and what you can achieve with them. And then in the next video, I wanted to show you how to go ahead and create the surface properties that you see here on these carbon rings in my background here, just how you can take those from a simple 3D shape and then apply the textures, apply the surface properties, and get something that looks pretty realistic. So with this graphic here, it's actually a logo effect that I started, and right now this element is comprised of two merged 3D objects, one being the kind of bulging blue shape here, and then the outer chrome ring is also another 3D shape. And represented here in the 3D panel, we've got the layer 1, and if I just go ahead and click on one of these, I'm going to select that outer ring there, you can see it breaks it down, and now we've got it by way of front inflation, front bevel, extrusion, back bevel, and back inflation. These properties are also reflected here in the 3D panel. If I go over to the third tab up here at the top, we can see just the different meshes for each of the objects in this 3D layer. And you can see there's quite a few of them because there's technically 3 different 3D objects merged here. We've got a letter in here that I actually have the visibility off for because I'm just modifying the background shape, which is comprised of 2 3D objects, again, one being this blue shape and then the other being the chrome ring. So I'm going to go back to my layer here because I like to use the master list so I can see everything that's going on here. And with this one selected, all that's going on with the outer ring here is the extrusion material. Remember I was talking about earlier about revolving. When you extrude an object and you wrap it around and close the shape, you get it kind of a loop, and that's what I created here. So all we're seeing is the extruded sides of that ring. So with that in mind, we're just going to go into the 3D panel here and choose layer 1 extrusion material. Now in this small preview window, you can see a graphic of the texture that is applied to that ring. Now, it's not applied directly to the image as a texture, but rather it is an environmental reflection. Now what do I mean by that? Well, if I were to go in here and let's just take the reflection down to 0. And let's just knock that off. There we go. So you can see it's got a base dark fill on that ring. It's just a simple extrusion and it's got a dark color fill in it. In fact, if we were to go in here and go into the edit texture, you can see it's just a black filled texture that is wrapped around that image. And what I wanted to do was make it reflect its environment. Now, if you go down here to the bottom of this panel, let's just kind of break down what we're looking at here inside of this. When you have a mesh selected, whether it's the front inflation, the extrusion material in this case, or any of these other faces, in the properties panel, you're going to see the materials associated with that mesh face. You have the diffuse texture, which is the actual surface, whether it's a graphic or something you would wrap around there. You can modify the specular highlights, the overall illumination of the scene, and the ambient light. And you can also go in here and modify the shine. How much of the light do you want to be shining on the object? Basically giving it kind of a glossy look to it, like I've got here. The reflection itself, you've got the roughness. How rough do you want these surfaces to be as they reflect these objects? Are they glass smooth or are they like sandpaper smooth? That's what you can handle here. You can add a bump map, which allows you to put a little bit of texture on the subject or on the object to give it a less of a clean look. You can change the opacity of the object. You can change the refraction. If you've got transparency on the graphic, you can actually have refraction like real glass would behave, but that's going into a much more advanced realm, and we'll get into that in another course. What I'm getting to down here is the environment setting. And you'll notice on this little folder icon, there's an icon indicating that there's something active in here. So if I click on this menu, and these are the same for all these little folder icons up here attached to each one of these features. If I click on the environment feature and go ahead and choose edit texture, it opens up this file. This is actually what I've got applied to that outer ring as an environment. Try and think of it this way. This object, imagine if it was enclosed in a giant sphere, and that sphere had this graphic wrapped around it, this kind of chrome metal graphic wrapped around it. So in order to see it reflecting in this ring, then I need to increase the reflectivity of the environment or of the object. So right now the reflection is set to 0, but watch what happens when I increase it to 100%. There, that reflection is now active. The reason why I like to, in this case, make this effect with the environment, because if I grab that object and rotate it around, just kind of give it a turn here, notice how that reflection is moving. Basically, it's an environment, as if you were to take a metallic object and just rotate it around, and you'll see how it reflects the environment around you. The same thing is happening here. It's reflecting that chrome environment, and thus giving me that chrome look to my object. So anytime I move it around, it's going to move with the environment as if it were a real reflection. So that's certainly applying it one way by way of an environment reflection. The next element I've got here, which is the blue sphere in the middle. Let's go ahead and twirl this down so we can reveal the properties here. I'm going to select the front inflation here. Notice in the graphic preview here, in this little preview, it tells me what kind of texture I've got on there. I'm going to go up here into the diffuse texture. Just click on that folder icon and go in here and choose Edit Texture. This is merely a flat, two-dimensional carbon fiber blue graphic. And I've just got it on top of a blue layer with the blend mode set to soft light. If you saw it for normal, it's just a regular carbon fiber pattern. Set to soft light over the blue. And because this is applied directly as a texture and not as an environment or a reflected item, it wraps itself around and curves out of that spherical object. So that's where we're getting that result there for this blue element here. So that's basically applying it directly. Now you can also get this diffuse texture, this little item. This is the same thing as if you went into the layers panel here, and attached to the layer are these texture files. You can actually access the layer 2 extrusion material, which is the sides, the layer 2 file itself, or the layer 1 extrusion material, or layer 1 front face itself. So if you just double click on these, it opens it up like a smart object, and you see the same exact file you did a moment ago. It opens up the same document, it's just getting to it from a different place. And all these different elements are available each time you select a certain property. And you can modify these. You can increase the shine. Let's actually go and increase the shine on the face here. There we go. You can see the lights getting a little bit more crazy. So different types of things. Again, a lot of experimentation in this. What you want to do is really just try it on different things. Let me show you a quick bump map demonstration here. We'll go back to this graphic here that I have, and jumping between 3D objects, 3D images, you're going to run into some lag sometimes. So let's go and get on this front inflation of this shape here. So let's say I wanted to add a little bit of texture to this. Well, I have this texture file here. It's just some cracks in this surface in this texture. So I'm going to go and select the front inflation, which is the front face of this gold shape here, into the bump setting here in the properties panel. And I'm just going to go into that folder icon and choose Load Texture. I'm going to locate that texture in my desktop here. Click Open. And based on the number here, determines how much of that feature is prominent as a bump map. The higher I go, the more rough it gets, and it gets me that kind of a textured look there, really reacting to the light. Bringing it lower makes that texture that much lower. So each one of these is its own property. You can add a texture to it, add a file to it, and it's going to react differently. And you can have, of course, different reflection features to add specular highlights, enhance them, all different properties you can modify. And these all work in conjunction with the 3D lights, which we're going to get much more in depth with in just a little bit after we talk about these different texture and surface properties. So again, you can get to them from within the layers panel at a limited set. You can get to the extrusion material or the layer 1. And even that bump map is right here, added to that as a file. If I double click on that, opens it up, and I can modify those properties. The great thing about these support files, these bump map files and all these things, they all support layers. They don't have to be flat JPEG. So you can go in there and create multiple layered documents of textures and apply these to your 3D objects via these properties panels and achieve some really interesting effects. So again, it tends to take a little bit of experimentation, but being able to modify these and add these much more realistic elements to your 3D objects is going to give you that much more of an edge on whatever you're creating. Now, remember what I said about processor speed. As you start adding more reflective elements, more textured elements, and all these things, it's going to get a little bit more taxing on your processor. So watch out for the speed and make sure that your graphic, your 3D graphic, is where you want it to be before you really dive in and start adding the surface properties and reflections and things like that. Because again, you're really going to start to feel it, especially if it's a pretty large 3D graphic that you're going to be building. But again, it's that much more efficient and that much faster than CS5. At this point in CS5, I probably would have stopped just because I was scared to go any further for fear of it crashing. That fear is pretty much removed, and we can be a little bit more adventurous with these features now here in CS5. So let's go into the next lesson where we're going to actually practice what we've been talking about here by applying these textures to the carbon fiber rings and get the lighting effects and reflection properties and really see it in context.